is this guy a cynical grifter who threw all his anti-Trump baggage overboard in order to suck up to the big man and look where it's got him? Or is he a radical person who was responding to events as he saw them? Um, he became convinced that the left in America is cynical, that its values are a lie, and that it's really about power. He reads the philosopher Carl Schmitt, and he said in a recent interview, "I don't believe this is all about some deep principle. It's about power." And so he became radicalized over things like trans, over the pandemic, and over what he sees as a war against the working class, white working class in America. Things like diversity and the whole thing around George Floyd as well. He sees that the white working class are basically dismissed and disparaged.
Mm.
So the question with Vance is, well, did he just radicalize in response to events, or did his ambition lead him to go and kiss the ring of Donald Trump?
Sunday Times' news review editor Josh Glancy has interviewed JD Vance in the flesh and joins us now. Morning to you, Josh.
Good morning, Asma.
I don't know where to start, really. I've got so many questions about JD Vance. Tell me the most important things about him.
Well, I think his life story is right at the heart of his narrative and his self-conception. You know, he's been compared at times to a white Barack Obama, which, or certainly on his way up, he was compared to that. I think for JD Vance, his central fact of life is the white working class that he came from, the Appalachian family from Kentucky that moved to Ohio and fell apart. And there was drugs, there was violence and addiction. And I think those are the people he cares about deeply. He's very tribal. And his mission in life is to get them a fair deal, really.
And when you met him, what was he like? Did you like him?
Yeah, I did like him at the time. I met him at a very interesting moment. I spent about 3 days with him in Ohio at his home. He was giving a commencement speech at a college, and we spoke on the phone a few times, and we stayed in touch afterwards. So it was just after he'd written Hillbilly Elegy, which was this extraordinary bestseller. And it was a memoir, really. And that was one of the things that drew parallels to Obama. A memoir of a person who hadn't actually done that much yet in life.
Mm.
But it talked to the collapse of morale, of the health of the white working class in places like Middletown, Ohio, where he'd grown up.
Mm.
And it chimed with the moment Trump had been elected, and elites on the coast wanted someone to explain it to them. And they turned to JD Vance and to his book to explain what has gone wrong with white America in their view, and who can explain it to us. So he became the guy to do that. But he was very critical of Trump, and all his quotes about Trump have now been aired constantly over the last 24 hours. You know, he said, "I never liked him." He described him as cultural heroin. He said he could end up being America's Hitler. He was a never Trump guy. So he was a conservative Republican, but very anti-Trump. So the left, the sort of liberal elite, CNN, lapped him up. And that was when I met him. So he was this kind of interesting hybrid figure. He'd gone off to California, become a venture capitalist, worked with Peter Thiel, who's his sort of mentor and patron, but had then become very disillusioned with California, very disillusioned with sort of liberal lifestyle, and moved back home to Ohio to try and sort of make the country good. And the question then was that I asked him repeatedly was, well, are you going to go into politics? And he was humming and hawing about it at the time. But even then, it was pretty clear where his path led.
What are his views? On the kind of the controversial topics. I mean, we'll talk about the Islamist stuff in a minute. There's a clip of him from a couple of days ago saying that he thought that a Labour government means that the UK is the most likely place for an Islamist threat to come from. But what are his policies on other things like Ukraine, abortion, rape, things like that?
Well, I think the way to look at JD Vance now is that he is a more ideological Trumpist than Donald Trump. He more closely represents the kind of MAGA, Make America Great Again ideology than Trump does, because Trump can be such a mercurial figure. Whereas I think Vance really is a true believer. He is an ideologue. He's what you would call a national conservative or a conservative populist. So his views on economics can be quite left-wing. You know, he's worked as a senator for her. He's worked with Elizabeth Warren. He chimes with some of the Bernie Sanders program. He thinks that capitalism is rigged against the kind of people he grew up with, and he wants to use the power of the state to reverse that somewhat. Culturally, he's very right-wing. He's very concerned about immigration. He's anti-abortion. He's not the most radical anti-abortion, but he's certainly quite firmly so. And he kind of loathes liberal America in the way that Trump does. He's come to loathe liberal America. He didn't used to. And so, but he's also a millennial. He's 39, and he lives online like the rest, like I do. And so he lives in those kind of online trolly sort of. He follows some quite right wing, quite sort of problematic figures online. You know, it's quite a lot of performative trolling and that sort of thing. So there's an aspect to him that's quite millennial in that way.
So if you, I mean, you met the guy and you know, you talked there about this, the kind of, some people might see it as a contradiction in some of his views. He's left on this, he's right on that. Is that strange? Is that opportunistic? Or is that actually just kind of, you know, Trump's camp, that as long as you believe in him, and believe that he is the right man for the job, almost everyone is welcome. I mean, you have to toe the line ultimately, and maybe change your mind on things. But you know, I wonder, does that kind of go to this idea of ticking boxes, relatability boxes, about having everyone in your team that pretty much represents everyone?
You know, so this is the fascinating question about Vance that has consumed coverage of him for years now, and everyone's so interested in him relative to your other junior senators from the Midwest. Is this guy a cynical grifter who threw all his anti-Trump baggage overboard in order to suck up to the big man and look where it's got him? Or is he a radical person who was responding to events as he saw them? He became convinced that the left in America is cynical, that its values are a lie, and that it's really about power. He reads the philosopher Carl Schmitt, and he said in a recent interview, "I don't believe this is all about some deep principle. It's about power." And so he became radicalized over things like trans, over the pandemic, and over what he sees as a war against the white working class in America. Things like diversity and the whole thing around George Floyd as well. He sees that the white working class are basically dismissed and disparaged. So the question with Vance is, well, did he just radicalize in response to events, or did his ambition lead him to go and kiss the ring of Donald Trump? My view is it's a bit of both. I know that's a sort of boring thing. I think people are too simplistic to think, oh, this guy's just a cynic and a grifter, and Trump just wants him because he ultimately, you know, bent the knee. I having met JD Vance and spent time with him, he's a smart guy, he's a thoughtful guy, he's a passionate, quite angry person who's angry about what's happened to his communities and his people. And I think he really does believe a lot of this stuff. And as I said, I think in some ways he's a more coherent ideologue than Trump is. But it also happens that he has ended up being the vice presidential nominee because he made nice with Trump. He's very good friends with Don Jr., Trump's son. And Tucker Carlson, who's the great tribune of national populism. So, you know, he's ambitious, but I do think he believes what he's saying.
So interesting. Josh, thank you so much for that. That is Josh Glancy. He's the Sunday Times' news review editor, and he met JD Vance a couple of years ago in the flesh.